Your ideas are outdated, Kieran. This company needs fresh thinking, not yesterday's solutions. The words sliced through the executive boardroom of Nexus Biotech like a scalpel. I stared at CEO Garrison, his perfectly styled silver hair catching the morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Seattle. Around the polished granite table sat 8 board members, their faces carefully neutral, avoiding eye contact. My name is Kieran Thorne. I'm 44 years old, and until 30 seconds ago, I was the chief innovation officer at the biotech company I'd helped transform from a struggling startup into a $200 million industry leader. For 12 years, I'd poured my life into revolutionary medical device prototypes, breakthrough diagnostic tools, and cutting-edge research that put Nexus on the map. Garrison adjusted his $3,000 suit and leaned back in his chair with the satisfied expression of a man who thought he'd just solved a complex problem. The same look he'd worn when he'd taken sole credit for my revolutionary glucose monitoring patch at last year's Medical Innovation Summit. The same smug smile he'd flashed when announcing our new direction toward AI-driven solutions, conveniently forgetting to mention that I'd been developing those very algorithms for 18 months. The board has decided to restructure our innovation department, he continued, his voice carrying that polished corporate tone he'd perfected for investor calls. We're bringing in younger talent, people who understand where technology is heading. Your severance package is quite generous. I looked down at the tablet he'd slid across the table. 6 months' salary and a standard non-compete clause that would essentially bar me from working in biotech for 2 years. 12 years of groundbreaking work, dozens of patents and innovations that had generated over $150 million in revenue, reduced to a legal document and a security escort to clear out my office. But here's what Garrison didn't know as he sat there savoring his moment of corporate power. 3 months ago, I'd completed work on something that would change everything. Something I'd kept completely off Nexus's books, developed entirely on my own time, using my own resources. Something that would make every single one of their current products obsolete within 6 months. And in exactly 4 hours, I had a meeting with their biggest competitor that would turn Garrison's lack of innovation comment into the most expensive mistake of his career. The security guard was already standing by the door, waiting to escort me out. But I wasn't leaving empty-handed. The security guard, a heavy-set man named Rodriguez, who'd always been polite during my late-night lab sessions, looked uncomfortable as he followed me to my office on the 15th floor. Sorry about this, Doctor. Thorne, he muttered as I began packing my personal items. Don't worry about it, Rodriguez. Just doing your job. I methodically gathered my belongings, family photos, my MIT diploma, the innovation awards that Garrison had conveniently forgotten to mention during my termination. But what I was really after was hidden in plain sight, a small silver flash drive tucked behind my desk nameplate. 12 years of working at Nexus had taught me one crucial lesson. Always keep your most important work portable. The drive contained something Garrison desperately needed but didn't even know existed. The complete research data for Project Helix, my revolutionary non-invasive cancer detection device. Dr. Thorne. Rodriguez cleared his throat. I hate to rush you, but almost done. I pocketed the drive and closed my briefcase. Actually, Rodriguez, could you do me a favor? Could you deliver a message to Mr. Vale? Sure. What's the message? I handed him a sealed envelope I'd prepared 3 months ago, when I first suspected Garrison was planning to force me out. Tell him this contains the location of all my research files for the cancer detection project, the one the FDA is expecting our preliminary data for next month. Rodriguez looked confused. I thought all research files were stored on the company's servers. I smiled. Some are, the important ones aren't. Mr. Vale will understand. As the elevator descended toward the parking garage, I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a contact I'd saved as Dr.Chen-Meridian Biotech. Dr. Sarah Chen, Chief Technology Officer at Nexus's biggest competitor, had been trying to recruit me for 8 months. I'd turned her down repeatedly out of loyalty to Nexus. That loyalty had just been terminated along with my employment. Dr. Chen, it's Kieran Thorne. About that conversation we had at the Boston conference. Yes, I'm suddenly very interested in exploring opportunities at Meridian. Actually, I was wondering if you had time to meet today. I have something I think you'll find extremely interesting. I could hear the surprise in her voice. Kieran, this is unexpected. Of course we can meet. What changed your mind? Let's just say my former employer helped me see things more clearly. How's 2 p.m. at the Harbor Club downtown? Perfect. I'll bring our full innovation team. I hung up and started my car. In 3 hours, Garrison Vale would open that envelope and discover that his outdated chief innovation officer had been holding the keys to Nexus's most critical project. And by then, I'd already be across town showing Meridian biotech exactly what innovation really looked like. The Harbor Club's private dining room overlooked Elliott Bay, where container ships moved slowly across the gray water. Dr. Sarah Chen sat across from me, flanked by Dr. James Morrison, Meridian's head of product development, and Elena Vasquez, their director of regulatory affairs. 3 of the sharpest minds in biotech, and they were all staring at the small device I'd placed in the center of the mahogany table. "This is it?" Dr. Chen asked, picking up what looked like a sleek smartphone case with a small sensor array. "That's it, the Helix scanner. Non-invasive cancer detection using quantum dot technology and AI pattern recognition. 94% accuracy rate, results in under 3 minutes, and it costs about $12 to manufacture." The silence stretched for 30 seconds. Dr. Morrison was the first to speak. That's impossible. Current technology is exactly that. Current. This is 3 generations ahead. I pulled out my tablet and showed them the test results. 18 months of development, over 2,000 test subjects, validated by 3 independent laboratories. It detects cellular metabolic changes that occur up to 6 months before tumors become visible on traditional scans. Elena leaned forward, her regulatory expertise kicking in. FDA approval timeline. Fast Track designation. The preliminary data package is complete, ready for submission. With Meridian's regulatory infrastructure, we could have conditional approval within 8 months. Dr. Chen set the device down carefully, as if it were made of pure gold. "Kieran, do you understand what you're showing us? This technology could revolutionize early cancer detection. The market size alone, $47 billion annually just in the United States," I finished. "Globally, we're looking at over $150 billion, and that's just the direct testing market. The data analytics, the integration with existing healthcare systems, the licensing opportunities. We could be looking at the largest medical breakthrough of the decade." Dr. Morrison was studying the technical specifications on my tablet. "The quantum dot synthesis process. How did you solve the stability issues?" "Proprietary polymer coating. I filed patents on the entire process." I pulled out a leather portfolio containing 17 different patent applications, filed individually under my name over the past year. Every component, every algorithm, every manufacturing process. "Wait," Elena said, her expression shifting. "You own these patents?" "Not Nexus. Developed entirely on my own time, using my own resources. Nexus has no claim to this technology." I looked around the table. "As of this morning, I'm no longer bound by any employment agreements with my former company." Dr. Chen's eyes lit up with the unmistakable gleam of a businesswoman who'd just realized she was sitting across from a potential gold mine. "What are you proposing?" "Exclusive licensing agreement with Meridian. You get first rights to all Helix technology. I get a senior director position, equity package, and 20% of net licensing revenue." I paused. "Oh, and there's one more thing you should know. Nexus is expecting to deliver preliminary FDA data for their competing project next month. Data they no longer have access to. The implications hit them immediately. Without that data, Nexus would miss their FDA deadline, lose their fast-track status, and fall at least 2 years behind in development. Meanwhile, Meridian would have exclusive access to superior technology and a clear path to market dominance. "When can you start?" Dr. Chen asked. I was sitting in my car in the Harbor Club parking garage when my phone started buzzing. Garrison's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring 4 times before answering. "Kieran, we need to talk." His voice had lost all traces of the confident executive who'd fired me 6 hours earlier. "I thought we finished talking this morning, Garrison. You were quite clear about my lack of innovation." Don't play games with me. Rodriguez delivered your envelope. Where are the Helix files? I started my engine and began backing out of the parking space. I'm sorry. Did you just ask me about files related to company research? I'm no longer employed by Nexus, remember? Perhaps you should ask your new, fresh-thinking innovation team. God damn it, Kieran. The FDA submission deadline is in 3 weeks. Without that data, you'll miss your fast-track designation and lose your competitive advantage. Yes, I'm aware of the timeline. I created the timeline. I could hear papers shuffling, voices in the background. The emergency board meeting had already started. What do you want? I don't want anything from you, Garrison. You made your choice this morning when you decided I was outdated. I pulled onto Fifth Avenue, heading toward Meridian's headquarters. Although I am curious about something, you mentioned bringing in younger talent. Have you found someone to replace me yet? The silence told me everything I needed to know. Garrison had fired me without having a replacement lined up, probably assuming he could just redistribute my responsibilities among existing staff. It was exactly the kind of short-sighted decision I'd watched him make for years. The board wants to meet with you, he said finally. We can discuss a consulting agreement, maybe a retention bonus. The board that sat silently while you questioned my innovation record, the same board that approved my termination without reviewing my current projects. I turned into Meridian's parking garage. I'm afraid I'm not available for consulting. I've accepted a position elsewhere. Where? That's not really your concern anymore. Through my rearview mirror, I could see a black sedan following me into the garage. Either Nexus was having me followed, or Garrison was more desperate than I'd thought. I do have some advice, though. You might want to start looking for a new innovation officer. I hear the biotech job market is pretty competitive these days. You can't do this. Your non-compete agreement covers working for competitors on projects I developed while employed at Nexus. It doesn't cover working on technology I developed independently. I parked and gathered my briefcase. You should have your legal team read more carefully. Kieran, please, be reasonable. What happened this morning? Maybe I was hasty. The board's been putting pressure on me, talking about cutting costs, showing more immediate results. And there it was. The truth Garrison couldn't admit during the termination meeting. He hadn't fired me because he thought I lacked innovation. He'd fired me because he needed a scapegoat for the board's pressure, someone to blame for the company's increasing research costs and longer development timelines. Goodbye, Garrison. I hung up and walked toward Meridian's elevators. Behind me, I could hear car doors slamming as whoever had been following me scrambled to keep up. But it was too late. In 30 minutes, I'd be signing a contract that would change everything. The elevator to Meridian's executive floor gave me 2 minutes to think about how everything had gone so wrong with Garrison Vale. We hadn't started as enemies. In fact, 12 years ago, we'd been something close to friends. I'd joined Nexus when it was still a struggling startup operating out of a converted warehouse in South Seattle. Garrison was the ambitious VP of Business Development, and I was the freshly minted PhD from MIT with big ideas about medical technology. We'd worked side by side for 3 years, him handling the business side while I focused on research and development. The first crack appeared when we landed the contract with Seattle Children's Hospital in 2018. I developed a revolutionary glucose monitoring system for pediatric diabetes patients, non-invasive, painless, and accurate enough to reduce fingerstick testing by 90%. When the hospital held their press conference announcing the partnership, Garrison stood at the podium talking about our team's breakthrough innovation, while I sat in the audience watching him take credit for 18 months of my work. I should have said something then, should have demanded recognition for my contributions. But I was naive enough to believe that good work would speak for itself, that success would be shared fairly among the people who created it. My wife Rachel saw the pattern before I did. She'd listened to me come home frustrated about meetings where Garrison would shoot down my proposals, only to present nearly identical ideas the following week as his own vision. She'd watch me work 80-hour weeks developing new prototypes while Garrison networked at industry conferences, positioning himself as Nexus's visionary leader. He's using you, she told me 2 years ago over dinner at our favorite restaurant in Fremont. And when he doesn't need you anymore, he'll throw you aside without a second thought. I defended him, made excuses about the pressure he was under as CEO, the demands from investors, the complex balance between innovation and profitability. Rachel had just smiled sadly and squeezed my hand. "I hope I'm wrong," she'd said. "But start protecting yourself. Document everything. Keep your own records." The warning signs had been everywhere. Last year, Garrison started excluding me from board meetings, claiming they were focused on high-level strategy that didn't require technical input. He hired a new director of innovation, a young Stanford MBA named Derek Hoffman, who spent more time in Garrison's office than in the lab, supposedly learning the business side of innovation management. 3 months ago, I'd caught Derek copying files from my secure research folders. When I confronted him, he claimed Garrison had authorized it for backup and redundancy purposes. When I asked Garrison about it, he gave me some story about preparing for a company-wide audit, ensuring all intellectual property was properly documented and secured. I'd started keeping my most sensitive work off the company servers after that. The Helix project became my insurance policy, developed entirely at home, using my own equipment, funded with my own savings. Every patent application filed in my name alone. If Garrison wanted to push me out, I'd make sure I didn't leave empty-handed. The elevator doors opened, and Dr. Chen was waiting with a warm smile and a leather portfolio that would seal Garrison's fate. "Dr. Thorne, welcome to Meridian," Dr. Chen said as we walked toward the conference room. "I have to admit, when you called this morning, I was shocked. What finally changed your mind about leaving Nexus?" I thought about her question as we passed Meridian's innovation labs, where researchers in clean suits were working on next-generation medical devices. I guess you could say I finally recognized the writing on the wall. The writing had been there for months, but I'd been too loyal, or too naive, to read it properly. It started with small changes. Garrison began scheduling innovation strategy sessions without inviting me, claiming they were preliminary discussions that would be shared later. Those sessions never materialized into shared information. Then Derek Hoffman arrived in January, fresh out of Stanford's MBA program, with a family connection to one of Nexus's board members and zero experience in biotech research. Garrison positioned him as my strategic partner, someone who could help bridge the gap between technical innovation and business implementation. "Derek's going to be working closely with you," Garrison had told me during the introduction meeting, "learning your processes, understanding how we can scale innovation more efficiently." What he didn't say was that Derek would be systematically documenting every aspect of my work, creating detailed reports about my methods, my ongoing projects, and my research timelines. I'd found out about the reports by accident 2 weeks ago. Derek had left his laptop open in the conference room during a meeting break, and I'd glanced at the screen while retrieving my notes. The document was titled Innovation Department Transition Plan and contained a comprehensive analysis of my role, my responsibilities, and recommendations for restructuring the department. The recommendations were damning. Derek had written that my approach was overly academic, that I focused too much on theoretical breakthroughs rather than commercially viable solutions. He suggested that the innovation department would benefit from fresh leadership with a more market-focused perspective. Most concerning was the timeline. Derek's plan called for a gradual transition of responsibilities over a 6-month period, followed by a restructuring announcement that would reposition the innovation team for future growth. The document was dated 3 months before my termination. I'd started preparing immediately. Every evening after work, I'd go home and transfer my most important research to personal servers. I created backup documentation for all my ongoing projects, filed additional patent applications for concepts I'd been developing, and began reaching out to former colleagues who'd moved to other companies. The Helix project became my ace in the hole. I'd been working on quantum dot cancer detection technology for 2 years, but I'd kept the most promising developments off Nexus's systems. Using my home lab, funded with money Rachel and I had saved for a kitchen renovation, I'd perfected the synthesis process, developed the AI algorithms, and completed human trials through a network of physician contacts. Last week, I told Dr. Chen as we entered the conference room, Garrison started asking specific questions about my research methodologies. He wanted to know about my documentation processes, how I stored sensitive data, which projects had the most commercial potential. Dr. Chen raised an eyebrow. He was mapping your intellectual property. Exactly. And yesterday, Derek scheduled a meeting for next week to discuss knowledge transfer protocols. Apparently, the company wanted to ensure that all critical information was properly archived and accessible to the team. I pulled out my phone and showed her the meeting invitation. The meeting was scheduled for the day after my termination. They were planning to pump me for information, then cut me loose. Dr. Chen shook her head. Corporate espionage disguised as knowledge management. We see it all the time. She opened her portfolio and pulled out a contract. Well, their loss is our gain. The Meridian contract signing took exactly 47 minutes. By the time I walked out of their building with a signed exclusive licensing agreement, 3 missed calls from Garrison were waiting on my phone. I ignored them and drove home to tell Rachel the news. She was in her art studio, working on a series of paintings that our new financial security would finally allow her to complete without worrying about gallery sales. When I told her about the day's events, she set down her brush and smiled. "I'm proud of you," she said. "It took courage to walk away from something you built." I didn't walk away. I was pushed. "No," she corrected. "You were set free." My phone rang again. This time it was Derek Hoffman's number. "Dr. Thorne, this is Derek. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time." I put the call on speaker so Rachel could hear. "What can I do for you, Derek?" "Well, I wanted to discuss the transition meeting we had scheduled for next week. Mr. Vale asked me to reach out and see if we could move it up. Maybe tomorrow morning." The desperation was barely concealed behind his professional tone. They'd realized that firing me before extracting my knowledge had been a strategic blunder. "I'm afraid I won't be available for any transition meetings, Derek. My employment with Nexus ended this morning." Right, of course. But Mr. Vale thought perhaps we could arrange a consulting agreement, just to help with the handover of your ongoing projects. Rachel rolled her eyes. I muted the phone and whispered, "He's probably recording this conversation." "Derek, can you help me understand something? Yesterday, your transition plan recommended restructuring the innovation department because my work was too theoretical. Today, you need my help with knowledge transfer. Which is it?" The silence stretched long enough for me to wonder if the call had dropped. "I'm not sure what you mean about a transition plan." "The document on your laptop. Innovation Department Transition Plan. 3 months of analysis concluding that my approach needed to be replaced with fresh leadership." Another pause. "Dr. Thorne, I think there may be some misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding, Derek. You've been documenting my work for months, preparing to take over my responsibilities. The only miscalculation was assuming I'd stick around to train my replacement." My phone buzzed with an incoming call. Garrison again. "Derek, I need to take another call. Good luck with the transition." I switched to Garrison's call. His voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "Kieran, stop playing games. The board is demanding answers about the Helix project. We need those files." "The board that approved my termination this morning, the same board that supported your decision to bring in younger, more innovative talent. The termination was a mistake, I admit it. The board moved too quickly, made a rash decision based on incomplete information." Rachel raised an eyebrow at the speakerphone. Even she could hear the desperation. "What kind of incomplete information?" "Financial pressure from investors, concerns about research costs, timeline delays on other projects. It wasn't about your innovation record. It was about budget constraints." There it was. The truth that Garrison couldn't admit during the termination meeting. He'd fired me not because he questioned my abilities, but because he needed to show the board he was cutting expenses. I was the highest paid member of the innovation team, and eliminating my position would save the company nearly $300,000 annually. "So you sacrificed 12 years of partnership to save money." "It wasn't supposed to be permanent. The plan was to bring you back as a consultant once the budget situation stabilized." "Whose plan? Yours or Derek's?" Garrison didn't answer, which told me everything. Derek's transition plan hadn't just been about taking over my responsibilities. It had been about eliminating my position entirely and recreating it at a lower salary level. The Helix data, Kieran. We need it for the FDA submission. Then you should have thought about that before you decided I was expendable. The next morning brought a registered letter from Nexus's legal department. Rachel found it on our doorstep when she went to get the newspaper. From Hartwell, Kingston & Associates, she read from the return address. Nexus's corporate lawyers. I opened the envelope and scanned the contents. Cease and desist order. They're claiming I stole proprietary information and demanding the return of all materials related to company research. Rachel read over my shoulder. Can they do that? They can try. I pulled out my phone and called my attorney, Sarah Winters, who'd handled my individual patent applications over the past year. Sarah, it's Kieran Thorne. I need to discuss a legal situation that just developed. I explained the termination, the licensing agreement with Meridian, and the cease and desist letter. Forward me the letter, she said. But from what you're describing, they don't have much of a case. Your patents were filed individually, the technology was developed independently, and you're no longer bound by your employment agreement. 2 hours later, Sarah called back with an analysis that made me smile. Kieran, this letter is more desperation than legal strategy. Their claims are weak and they know it. But I do recommend we respond aggressively. Are you prepared for this to get ugly? How ugly? They'll probably claim corporate espionage, theft of trade secrets, violation of fiduciary duty, standard intimidation tactics designed to make you settle rather than fight. What do you recommend? We file a preemptive lawsuit, wrongful termination, breach of contract, intentional interference with prospective business relations. And here's the interesting part. If they try to claim your technology belongs to them, we can demand full discovery of their research and development processes. I thought about that for a moment. What would discovery include? Everything. Email communications, board meeting minutes, internal memos, Derek Hoffman's transition plans. If they want to fight about intellectual property, they'll have to open their books to prove they have a legitimate claim. Do it. By noon, Sarah had filed a comprehensive lawsuit against Nexus. By 2 p.m., Garrison was calling again. What the hell do you think you're doing? His voice had lost all pretense of professional courtesy. I'm protecting my interests, just like you protected yours when you fired me. We offered you a consulting contract. We tried to work this out reasonably. You offered me crumbs after serving me a betrayal sandwich. There's a difference. The lawsuit is a mistake, Kieran. We have documentation showing you used company resources for personal projects, evidence that you deliberately withheld critical information from your employer. I almost laughed. Please, show that documentation to a judge. I'd love to see Derek's reports about my theoretical approach and lack of commercial focus presented as evidence that I was essential to the company. You're making this personal. You made it personal when you fired me to save money while pretending it was about innovation. You made it personal when you had Derek document my methods so you could replace me with cheaper talent. This is about business, not personal grievances. Then let's talk business. As of this morning, Meridian Biotech has exclusive licensing rights to cancer detection technology that's 3 years ahead of anything Nexus has in development. Your FDA submission is dead without the Helix data, and even if you could recreate the research, you're looking at a 2-year delay in getting to market. We'll develop competing technology. With what team? You fired your chief innovation officer and hired an MBA with no research experience. Derek's great at writing reports, but can he synthesize quantum dots? The line went quiet. Through the silence, I could almost hear Garrison calculating the cost of his decision. What do you want? I want you to remember this conversation in 6 months when Meridian announces FDA approval for breakthrough cancer detection technology. I want you to think about this moment when you're explaining to your board why Nexus lost its competitive advantage. Kieran, we're done talking, Garrison. My lawyer will handle all future communications. 3 weeks later, Garrison requested a face-to-face meeting. Not through lawyers, not through Derek, but a direct call asking if we could sit down and work this out like adults. Against Sarah's advice, I agreed to meet him at Canlis. an upscale restaurant overlooking Lake Union where we'd celebrated major business victories in the better days of our partnership. He was already waiting when I arrived, looking like he'd aged 5 years and 3 weeks. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, and his expensive suit couldn't hide the stress that had settled into his posture. "Thanks for coming," he said as I sat down across from him. "You said you had a proposal." "I do." He pulled out a leather portfolio. "Full reinstatement as Chief Innovation Officer, 20% salary increase, expanded research budget, complete autonomy over your department." I didn't touch the portfolio. "And in exchange, you transfer the Helix technology to Nexus and terminate your agreement with Meridian." "Interesting proposal. There's just one problem." "What's that?" "I'm not interested in working for you anymore." I signaled the waiter for coffee. "But I am curious about something. How did the board react when they found out you'd fired me without securing the Helix data?" Garrison's face tightened. "That's not relevant to—" "Oh, I think it's very relevant. See, I've been talking to some contacts in the industry. Turns out news travels fast in biotech circles. Word is that Nexus missed a critical FDA deadline, lost their fast-track designation, and is scrambling to explain a 2-year delay to investors. The situation is more complex than industry gossip suggests." "Is it?" I pulled out my phone and showed him a news article from Biotech Weekly. "Nexus Systems faces investor scrutiny after innovation setbacks." That's this morning's headline. Garrison glanced at the article and looked away. "Temporary difficulties. The company remains strong. Dr. Patricia Wong at Vanberg Capital doesn't think so. She's been asking questions about management decisions and strategic planning. Apparently, some investors are concerned about leadership stability." The color drained from Garrison's face. Vanberg Capital was Nexus's largest investor, controlling nearly 30% of the company's equity. If they lost confidence in management, they could force significant changes. Patricia's always been cautious. It's not unusual for investors to ask questions during challenging periods. "She's not just asking questions, Garrison. She's conducting due diligence for a potential leadership change." I sipped my coffee and watched his reaction. "Turns out she's been friends with Dr. Chen at Meridian for years. They've had some interesting conversations about strategic partnerships and technology acquisition." Now Garrison looked genuinely panicked. "What kind of conversations?" "The kind where Vanberg considers divesting from underperforming companies and investing in their more innovative competitors." I leaned back in my chair. "The kind where they discuss whether Nexus might be more valuable as an acquisition target than as a standalone company." "That's impossible. We have long-term contracts, established client relationships, built around technology that you no longer have access to. Dr. Chen was very interested in my insights about Nexus's actual capabilities versus their marketing claims. The truth was hitting him in waves. Not only had he lost me and the Helix technology, but his actions had potentially triggered a hostile takeover scenario. Vanberg Capital had the leverage to force a merger or management change, and Meridian had the technology and relationships to emerge as the dominant player." "What do you want?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want you to understand something. 12 years ago, we were partners building something important together. You threw that away because you were more concerned about looking good to the board than actually doing good work. I made mistakes, you made choices, and now you're living with the consequences." I stood up and left a 20 on the table. "Enjoy your dinner, Garrison. It might be your last meal as CEO." The call came on a Friday evening 6 weeks later while Rachel and I were having dinner at home. Dr. Chen's name appeared on my phone screen. "Kieran, I hope I'm not interrupting, but I wanted to give you the news personally before it hits the press on Monday." "What news?" "Vanberg Capital just announced a majority stake acquisition in Nexus Biotech. The board voted unanimously to accept the buyout offer." Rachel looked up from her salmon. "Is that good or bad?" I put the call on speaker. "Sarah, what does this mean for the Helix project?" "It means Meridian now has a clear path to acquire Nexus's remaining assets, including their client contracts and manufacturing facilities. We're essentially buying out our only significant competitor." The pieces were falling into place exactly as I'd hoped. When I'd first approached Dr. Chen about the licensing agreement, I'd mentioned more than just the Helix technology. I'd also shared detailed intelligence about Nexus's vulnerabilities, their financial pressures, and their strategic mistakes. The integration timeline is accelerated, Dr. Chen continued. We want to bring you on as Vice President of Advanced Research, overseeing both the Helix rollout and the integration of acquired Nexus technologies. What about their current staff? We'll retain essential personnel, research scientists, some of the clinical team, key account managers, but management positions are being eliminated. I thought about Derek Hoffman, probably updating his LinkedIn profile at that very moment. What about Garrison Vale? Terminated immediately, Vanberg's due diligence revealed some concerning decisions over the past year. Apparently, he fired a key innovation officer just weeks before a critical FDA submission, then tried to cover up the resulting delays with misleading investor communications. Rachel raised her wine glass in a mock toast. To poor management decisions. There's one more thing, Dr. Chen said. The FDA fast-track approval came through this afternoon. The Helix scanner will be in clinical trials next month, with full market approval expected by year-end. After the call ended, Rachel and I sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, processing the magnitude of what had just happened. Do you feel bad for him? She asked. For Garrison? I thought about it honestly. 12 years of partnership, of building something together, of shared victories and late-night problem-solving sessions. Then I thought about the humiliation of being fired in front of the board, the accusations about my lack of innovation, the systematic plan to replace me with cheaper talent. I feel bad for the person he used to be, I said finally. The partner I thought I was working with. But that person disappeared years ago. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Congratulations on the Meridian promotion. Hope it was worth destroying everything we built together. Gee. I showed the message to Rachel. She rolled her eyes. He still doesn't get it, she said. He thinks you destroyed what you built together. He destroyed it the moment he decided I was expendable. I deleted the message without responding. Garrison Vale belonged to my past now. The future belonged to innovation, real innovation, the kind that changed lives instead of just impressing board members. On Monday morning, I'd walk into my new office at Meridian as Vice President of Advanced Research, overseeing a team of brilliant scientists working on technology that would revolutionize cancer detection. The Helix scanner would save thousands of lives, generate billions in revenue, and establish new standards for medical innovation. And somewhere across town, Garrison would be cleaning out his office, finally understanding the true cost of his lack of vision. 6 months later, I stood in the auditorium at Seattle Center, looking out at an audience of oncologists, researchers, and medical device executives who'd gathered for the Pacific Northwest Medical Innovation Summit, the same conference where Garrison had taken credit for my glucose monitoring system 4 years earlier. Ladies and gentlemen, the moderator announced, please welcome Dr. Kieran Thorne, Vice President of Advanced Research at Meridian Biotech, presenting breakthrough technology in early cancer detection. The Helix scanner sat on the demonstration table, its sleek design drawing admiring glances from the audience. In the 6 months since FDA approval, it had been deployed in 47 medical centers across the country, detecting over 2,000 cases of early-stage cancer that would have gone undiagnosed for months using traditional methods. The Helix scanner represents a fundamental shift in how we approach cancer screening, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. Instead of waiting for tumors to become visible, we can now detect metabolic changes that occur months before traditional symptoms appear. I walked through the technology demonstration, showing how a simple 3-minute scan could provide results with 94% accuracy. The audience was captivated, asking detailed questions about the quantum dot synthesis, the AI pattern recognition algorithms, and the integration with existing healthcare systems. In the back of the auditorium, I spotted a familiar figure, Derek Hoffman, now working for a small startup in Portland, taking notes like a graduate student. He caught my eye and nodded respectfully. Whatever resentment he might have felt about his role in the Nexus collapse had apparently been replaced by professional admiration. After the presentation, Dr. Patricia Wong from Vanberg Capital approached me during the networking reception. "Exceptional presentation, Dr. Thorne. I wanted to personally congratulate you on the Helix success." "Thank you, Dr. Wong. I understand Vanberg has been pleased with the Meridian investment returns." She smiled. "Beyond our projections. The technology integration from the Nexus acquisition has been seamless, and the Helix licensing revenue has exceeded first-year targets by 200%. Any regrets about the management changes? None whatsoever. Due diligence revealed that the previous leadership team had made several strategic errors that would have prevented them from capitalizing on their assets." She paused. Mr. Vale's decision to terminate key personnel just before critical project deadlines was particularly concerning. I'd heard through industry contacts that Garrison had struggled to find employment after the Nexus acquisition. His reputation for poor strategic decision-making had spread quickly through the biotech community. He'd eventually taken a regional sales position with a medical supply company in Portland, earning roughly 20% of his former salary. Rodriguez, the security guard who'd escorted me out of Nexus, had been hired by Meridian as part of the acquisition. He'd found me in the exhibition hall earlier that day. "Dr. Thorne, I wanted to thank you," he'd said. "When Meridian took over the building, they kept most of the support staff. Better benefits, too. I'm glad things worked out, Rodriguez." The irony wasn't lost on me. Rodriguez, the security guard, had survived the acquisition. Derek Hoffman, despite his MBA and family connections, had been deemed non-essential. Competence and character mattered more than credentials and networking. As the evening wound down, Rachel joined me on the exhibition floor. She'd been networking with potential gallery contacts, planning her first solo art show funded by our new financial security. "How did it feel?" she asked. "Being back on that stage. Different. Better." I looked around the bustling exhibition hall, where researchers and entrepreneurs were discussing the future of medical technology. 4 years ago, I stood in the audience while someone else took credit for my work. Tonight, I presented my own innovation to people who understood its value. "Any second thoughts about how you handled things with Garrison?" I considered the question seriously. Garrison Vale had been my partner for 12 years. We'd built something significant together before ambition and insecurity poisoned our relationship. His downfall had been thorough and, in many ways, self-inflicted. "He made his choices," I said finally. "I just made sure he lived with the consequences." My phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Chen. "Congratulations on tonight's presentation. Board approved your proposal for the European expansion. Start assembling your team." The Helix technology would soon be available in London, Berlin, and Paris, bringing early cancer detection to millions of additional patients. The licensing revenue would fund the next generation of medical innovations, creating a sustainable cycle of research and development. As Rachel and I walked to our car, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. Garrison's betrayal had been painful, but it had also freed me to pursue work that truly mattered. Innovation wasn't about impressing board members or meeting quarterly targets. It was about solving problems that improved human lives. The future was bright, filled with possibilities that extended far beyond personal vindication. And somewhere in Portland, Garrison Vale was probably lying awake, finally understanding the true cost of treating people as expendable assets. Justice, it turned out, was the most innovative solution of all.